It's lovely to see you all this morning. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ranjana. Khanna. I'm the director of the Franklin Humanities Institute, where you find yourselves this morning. And I'm delighted to welcome you all here for this semester's Bookwatch event on Charlie Piot's new book, in collaboration with Kodjo Nicolas Batema, The Fixer, Vigh's Lottery Chronicles. Bookwatch has, since 2004, been one of the Franklin Humanities Institute's signature events in which we collaborate with the library to celebrate the publication of a book from the previous year or the previous few months, sometimes it ends up being the last couple of years, and invite our colleagues, both local and distant, to come and engage with it. Today, in addition to the library, I'm very happy to have as co-sponsors Duke University Press, published Charlie's book, and Charlie's home departments, AAAS and Cultural Anthropology, as well as the Africa Initiative. Previous Bookwatch events have been organized around books by, and this is sort of from the most recent out, David Morgan, Richard Brodhead, Timothy Tyson, Michel Longino, Nega Matahede, Andrew Janiak with Liz Milovic, Laurent Dubois, Roberto Dinotto, Srinivasa Ravamadhan, Kate Hales, Bill Reddy, Carla Holloway, Michael Hart with Antonio Negri, Thavolia Lymph, J. Cameron Carter, Margaret Humphreys, Margaret Greer, Walter Mignolo, Maureen Quilligan, Torrell Moy, Anne Allison, Barbara Hernstein-Smith, and Kathy Davidson. This is a somewhat larger group of commentators than we usually have, with the result that I am going to introduce Charlie fully and just give you the names of our respondents whose fuller biographies are in the program. I do just want to give a warm welcome to them, though, some who have come from afar and were here yesterday for a conference organized by Charlie, and some from closer by. Hans Lucht and Henrik Vigh from Copenhagen, where I've just returned from. Our regular visitor to Duke and FHI, Achille Mbembe, who joins us from Johannesburg. Aïssatou Mbodj from the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique in Aubervilliers in France. Ian Baucom, our former colleague here at Duke and former director of the FHI, I should say, who joins us from just up the road in Charlottesville. And Tsitsi Jaji from the English department, who's come all the way from West Campus here at Duke. And Charlie will later introduce Kodjo Nicolas Batema, aka The Fixer, to us a little later, as he's going to join us on Skype in conversation. Charlie is, of course, a much beloved member of the faculty here at Duke and has occupied many administrative positions, which you can find out about if you're interested. I'm not going to list them now. But more importantly, and most importantly, has been a generous and consistent interlocutor in all the most exciting venues at our university for faculty and students alike. He's generous, curious, a fantastic raconteur, deeply committed to the pleasures of intellectual life, and he has long been one of the people who animates the lives of many of us at Duke and the conversations that we have here. Charlie's research centers on rural West Africa and particularly Togo. His first book, Remotely Global, Village Modernity in West Africa from Chicago in 1999, took issue with earlier understanding of the country as being out of the way, static, insular, a bounded society. And Charlie shows not only that that idea falls within a tired opposition between tradition and modernity, but also how Togo is part of a global network and functions within a global political economy. And through a detailed reading of exchange relations and systems of complementarity between groups, he reveals how the Cabre from the savannah region of northern Togo and other voltaic people have for hundreds of years been shaped by interactions with other societies, both African and European. This long history becomes the ground on which Cabre negotiates new forms of modernity and globalization. That book was the winner of the Emery Talbot Prize and was also runner-up for the Herskovits Prize. His second book, Nostalgia for the Future, West Africa After the Cold War, also from Chicago, 2010, turns on an analysis of the post-Cold War moment in Togo in which both the state and structures of local nation state and structures of local chieftaincy were disempowered. He looked at the major shifts in political economy, focusing on how the future was being reimagined through NGOs, human rights discourses, Pentecostal churches, development, different future-oriented imaginaries. These somewhat turbulent but always creative forms of imagining futurity following a bleaker period of post-colonial disappointment finds many examples, one of which involves the green card lottery and fantasies of future marriage. And that book won the African Politics Conference Group Award. Is that right? Is that the right name? Charlie has also edited volumes, and he also is the former editor with Anne Allison of Cultural Anthropology, the flagship journal of the field, and from what I understand from my colleagues in that field, really shifted the conversation dramatically in the journal and gave it a new life. So the Green Card Lottery book that became the basis of, I think, of the book we will be discussing here today, The Fixer, Vigh's Lottery Chronicles. This book, as we will hear, explores the canny negotiations between, among other things, the US Embassy and Togolese applicants for green cards, fixers, pop-up wives, and transnational negotiations of payment for the very expensive process of being interviewed for papers. I won't say more right now, but welcome you today. Our speakers will comment for 5 minutes or so each. Then we will have a conversation with Kodjo also. And we're going to go in alphabetical order this morning, which means that we will be starting with Ian, then going to Tsitsi, then to Hans, to Achille, Aïssatou, and then Henrik. Okay, thank you very much.
So thanks, Ranji. It is good and uncanny to be here, but particularly thank you, Charlie, for this book and the chance to talk about it. I was told that I have between 5 and 7 minutes. I'll try to stick to 5, but I'm going to get right into it. I actually, Charlie, read the whole book. Just so you know, I want to put my hand up and say I did that. But I want to organize my comments around a figure in the first paragraph. So let me just read the opening paragraph of the book. His office is a hole in the wall on a sandy street in a ragged neighborhood of Lomé. His seesaw limp from a road accident during a business trip to northern Togo defines his gait, a risk of the trade, he calls it. But his face bristles with intensity and warmth, like Charlie's, and his imposing intellect, like Charlie's, trumps all. And then this is the piece. Inside that hole in the wall, his bureau, he calls it, Kodjo operates a global business that would make a venture capitalist proud. I just think it's lovely. It gives you a sense of the tone of the book, of the writing style, of the panache. But it also establishes this figure of the relationship between the global and the hole in the wall. And that's sort of what I wanted to think about, because it gives you a sense that the book is going to provide an aperture in a dual sense, an aperture in a very distinct and particular place that is fleshed out so that by the time we get to the end of the book, we really understand how vast and complex that hole in the wall is. But it's a hole in the global. It's sort of a hole in a hole. And it's that relationship between the particularity of that one place and the multiple dynamics that the book unfolds that I think is really fascinating. So in 5 minutes, I want to talk about 6 processes, and I'm going to hold myself to them very briefly. So what I got a sense of is that there are at least 6 transglobal, and maybe, Charlie, a question for you, would you also call them transplanetary dynamics? Use the word global here, not planetary. 6 transglobal, potentially transplanetary dynamics that the book unfolds. So these are the ones that leap out. One, quite clearly, quite obviously, the dynamics of migration, of mobility, of immobilization, and the ways in which immobilization can be mobilized. And 2 kinds of mobilization. The mobilization of the body, ultimately the body in transit, the body in movement from one place to another. But what is really striking about the process of mobilization in this book is the extent to which theatricality and performance and invention are fundamental to the capacity for bodies to move. So that's a first. A second is of the endless vernacular production of new forms of finance capital. Again, you get that in that opening paragraph. There's a lovely chapter on finance futures and the production of diasporic debt markets, of credit markets, of future markets. That's just really sort of wonderfully done. I won't say more about that, but I think that's one of the really interesting parts of the book. A third is it opens a window on the equally vernacular production of precariousness and precarity, and provides an avenue to thinking the relationship between finance and precarity, the ways in which financial markets, perhaps not beyond Lomé, but beyond the control of the fixer, are productive of conditions of precarious living, debt restructuring, austerity programs, all these sorts of things. But also quite interesting the ways in which precariousness itself produces finance instruments. It sort of echoes that point. And one of the pieces that really leapt out at me in terms of the invention of new finance markets is the way in which the dossier of the lottery winner who is seeking an interview for the capacity for their body potentially to move if they properly perform the theater of the interview. The dossier becomes a tradable commodity. And I think that's really quite fascinating. There's an ethical question that you raise in the book at the beginning and the end. Should I publish, should I not publish? And Kodjo advises you publish. And in part because he has an enormous degree of confidence that he will remain a step ahead. And I sense that on this finance side, he'll remain a step ahead. I can imagine him bundling these dossiers. I can imagine equity swaps. If he's not shorting the market, he should be shorting the market because you can go long and short on these things. I mean, there are ways in which he can make money if our current president shuts this down. If he sells short of the market. So anyway, that was great. Okay, three more that really struck me, and I want to say just a tiny bit more. Ranji, cut me off if I go on too long. The first, because of the attention to the interview with the consular officer. I was really struck by the way in which this book is in conversation with the reemergence of the problem of the banality of evil. And thinking about the ways in which, in a hyper-authoritarian moment, the dilemma is not only the person of the authoritarian sovereign, and the dilemma is not only the fact of the wall. The dilemma is the dilemma of the one and the one and the one and the one, the petty bureaucrats who have absolute micro-sovereignty over so many lives. I was listening to an interview. Ira Glasses had a report on asylum officers on the U.S.-Mexican border recently, and thinking about the relationship between the consular officer and the asylum officer, and just that reticulated spread of corrupted power. I think that's an important conversation that the book enters into. The second is that I feel the book really opens a window on a conversation that many people have been having on what I think of as the dialectic of interpretation and data. And this sort of, within the context of the book, the way in which an increased sort of data bank-driven analysis of the person of the interviewee and the capacity to predict what their behavior might be is beginning to trump the interpretation. Am I done? Yeah. Oh, is beginning to trump the capacity of what Homi Bhabha has called the right to be interpreted, right? The right to interpretation. And this really strikes me as one of the fundamental struggles of our time, the relationship between data and interpretation. It's very powerful in the book. In Achille's terms from yesterday, it strikes me that it's a struggle of the right to life beyond computation, the right to an incalculable life. And I see the book engaging and giving us an ethnography of the interpreted life. Two other just quick things I want to say about that. I think that this is important for the book. I think it's incredibly important for universities. I think it's incredibly important for the future of our knowledge practices, as the question of the purpose of the university is increasingly indexed to the relationship to quantifiable problems as opposed to hermeneutic problems. And as the question of global grand challenges defines the mission of the university, solvable challenges that are quantifiable. And I just think that this is not to set an opposition between the interpretive faculty and the quantitative faculty. That's not what I mean. But to reassert that the questions that universities face are interpretive questions that require quantification and data. But they're not data questions, and I just think it's an incredibly important thing. And then finally, in my 5 minutes to wrap up, the thing that this I felt really opens a window to is a question that picks up on 2 points from Michael Hart and Achille's comments yesterday. And a question for you, Charlie, is how would you respond to the proposition that what you are tracing in the book and the mobility logics you're looking at fit or do not fit within Michael's proposition that there might be a new internationalism or a new insurgency? Do you think of this as fitting in those terms? And then to bring in Achille's questions and back to my opening comment about the appearance of the word global but not planetary, if it is a mobile international or a mobile insurgency, is it of a new order that is planetary in its logics, and planetary in potentially two forms, and this really is the last thing I want to say. Planetary in Paul Gilroy's sense of a humanistic planetary internationalism, a planetary right to move, or is it post-human in ways that I think Achille might push to? A planetary internationalism that is about the planetary right to move, but is also a planetariness of the relationship between the mobility of bodies and of the non-human actors that set bodies in motion. And then the very last point, I told you laughter, thank you. Thank you for the laughter in the book. And what's the relationship between laughter and the politics of happiness? So anyway, thank you, Charlie, for this book. This was just a delight.
Good morning, everyone. I think the fullness of the room already speaks to the excitement and value of Charlie's book. I think, first of all, I'm going to apologize because I have to run at 11:30. I teach at 11:45 a class on the Introduction to Writing Poetry, and so I will respond as an English professor and a poet. First of all, what really struck me is Kodjo's expertise as a coach in narrative, and that one could think of him as a writing coach and also a performance coach. And what's striking is the range of genres that he has mastered, and also his skill in teaching a series of forms of writing. The dossier adds up to those, and of encouraging a particular kind of improvisation. And so that, for me, is one of the answers to what happens if and when the visa lottery system is closed down, because there's always going to be other forms of visa that one needs. And a colleague of mine at Penn State, Ebony Coletu, among many other folks, has been interested in these genres of appeal, of forms, et cetera, and she's trained in rhetoric. And so again, I think that the kind of work that you're doing, I could imagine assigning a chapter of this to one of my writing classes, and having them think about how a form evolves over time. So that was one of the things I enjoyed quite a lot. I was struck also by resonances with some of my favorite novels and short story collections from West Africa. And as is always the case, they are all Nigerian. So the first one is Chris Abani's novel, Graceland, which comes from the 1990s. It's about a Nigerian Elvis impersonator who spends a lot of his time on the beach figuring out how can he get out of, eventually of Lagos. And there's only one moment in this that comes up where Togo figures, and that is when he is handed a US passport with a fake visa in it, but only for a trip across the border to Togo, accompanying a group of traffickers who are moving cocaine around. So this idea that the passport with its own forms of fake writing in it is also a genre that moves across borders was really striking. The other two are more recent from short story collections. Chinelo Okparanta's Water Like Something or Other is the title of the collection. And she has a short story called America in it, where a couple, a lesbian couple, have to figure out how to generate narratives that will be convincing. And one of those, one member of the couple is a math teacher and claims that she wants to go to teach math, and that's a valued form of expertise. And so the idea that this shifts our attention to a class of folks who do have expertise both in terms of enough resources to figure out who else they connect to generate this sum of money, but also who find this as a way to enable other forms of coupling. The fake marriages or marriages that turn into relationships were interesting to me, and in that continuum. Especially because you make the point that even if, say, a woman that works with Kodjo travels, divorces, comes back, and takes another husband, who are the officials in the U.S. Embassy to say that that was a fake process? And of course, in Chimamanda Adichie's The Thing Around Your Neck, she has a story, American Embassy, where the queue waiting to get into the embassy for the interview generates all sorts of socialities. And so what you help us pay attention to is this proliferation of genres of narration that figures like Kodjo are able to generate, but also to tap into that already exist. I forgot to put my timer on, and I trust that Ranji will let me know. But what I wanted to finish with is reading a couple of poems. Partially, this is a book plug for Charlie, but I get the right to do that as well here. This collection of poems, Mother Tongues, just came out on Friday officially. So thank you. I am very excited about it. So I think first I'll read a poem that comes up a lot that I don't know why people like it so much, because I don't particularly like it. It's called Document for U.S. Citizens Who Have Never Applied for a Visa and Have Had It Up to Here with Those Loud Aliens Who Go On and On About Some Letter. It is not like going to the bank. There are no hard candies in a basket made in China, and no Kleenexes on the counter. There's no refund if someone forgets to wish you a good day. There are no chairs for the aged, no toys for 2-year-olds with earaches, no supervisor to speak to in case of the absurd. There are no meal vouchers if it takes all day, no list of local hotels with a negotiated rate. No one wants to know if you are a doctor. Plastic is not magic. Seals are not signs. Your cousin brother's wedding is not relevant. Hell, there is no such thing as a cousin brother. And it is always your fault. Not enough planning, the wrong color passport, the misplaced stress in a word. And I think what you help us pay attention to is that in this narrative and perception that we have of the complete bleakness of the embassies and their power, etc., that there are all sorts of words and pronunciations of words, the stress of words that become the sites of creativity. And so that's one of the really exciting things about this book. Should I stop there? Okay, but it's a poem. Okay, I guess the other thing I'll read is a poem called Ethiopia Stretches Forth Her Hands that also thinks about multiple ways that blackness, but particularly the local blacknesses of a desire to leave, are interconnected. And so I'll just say that this evokes not only Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman, which is a misquote, of course, but also the signs that the garbage collection workers in Tennessee wore in their protests at the very end of Martin Luther King's life about to advocate for their pay. I, Sphinx, am Cheops. Peace be upon you, peace only. Hear the mother's plaint. I passed my GCSE in 1986. My small boy is old enough to marry now, and I have never held a job, and neither has he. No Sphinx before onions. I squint my pity. I sleep west of Tunisia, but I wake with the sun. The world is all a twitter. Schisms open up. Dear lion of Alexandria, dear desert, oh dear Ra, the land of immolation, the acrid waft of refusal, the placard's tight riddle. I am a man, and yet who always ends where she began? I ask you this, ain't I a woman? So I'll end there. Thank you, Charlie. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Charlie, and thank you for inviting me to say a few words about this book. It's really extremely interesting to me because I work on very similar issues with migrant brokers in Niger, with Ghanaian migrant brokers in Niger who work on the Desert Trail, facilitating the journey between West Africa, across the Sahara into North Africa. And of course, it's a different situation, but in many ways, there are so many similarities in the situation and in the predicament and in what they tell us about the current political and social moment, that this book will be, an important reference point for me going forward. I wanted to say three things very, very briefly. First, I wanted to congratulate you on the writing. I mean, it's really beautifully written and engaging, and what I especially like about it is that this is a story that could be very gloomy, I suppose. It could be a story of doom and of suffering, which it very often is. And I often have that problem in my writing, that people die all around me, and it's a very sad story. But you insist on showing the full repertoire of human emotions and experiences. And in a way, that makes it a lot stronger than only focusing on one aspect of human life, suffering. So in a way, we have people here, characters who are living and breathing and who really give us a sense of what existence is like in this very particular place. So that I like a lot, and I assume that this book would be, a classic in Africanist studies on this issue. And I also wanted to say that it's great for anthropology that we have these kind of ethnographies, that we have these greater stories that in a very disjointed and fragmented time seems to collect and experience over time, and the fact that you have invested so much of your own time, of your life, and of yourself in the story really comes through and give us a very comprehensive understanding of this particular situation. So in a sense, it also becomes a justification for the monograph. And I would, invite you to explore that a little bit if we have time. I mean, what is it that the monograph can do that our journal writing does not do? I mean, the way in a monograph, the way you so successfully write about very complex issues in such an unpretentious way. I mean, that's really, really, amazing. It's a complicated book, a lot of very difficult and incomprehensible issues, but you flow through it, like it's a novel. So, I really, really congratulate you on that. Beautiful work. So, the second issue, the broker. Of course, I think you have a knack for choosing the right issues, and then I'm not saying that because I work on the same issue. Well, maybe also a little bit. But the broker, of course, emerges as this quintessential figure of our time. He who holds the key to the external world for large parts of the global population who can't go anywhere. So obviously, this person, this trickster, this fixer, who has a long history, of course, in West Africa, as a person who guards the threshold, as a person who's approached at a cost, who's a dubious person, who can cheat you, but who can also help you, who can be dangerous and can also be a savior. In many ways, this person here re-emerges in full force as that person who will guard local aspirations in a time of scarcity and injustice, really. And it's not surprising that also this figure of the broker will be the object of great attention and anger in those parts of the world where, for instance, I'm from Europe, where we would like poor people to stay in the places where they happen to be born. So the easy fix would be, instead of trying to address the structural injustices and those frozen circumstances and the historical injustices that keep other people in these situations, we attack, of course, the broker, the fixer, the pusher, the big criminal mastermind who is organizing all these illicit flows. But when you look at it, and that's a big contribution of yours, is that we don't see a criminal mastermind emerging, we see a human being in full. Somebody who's gaming the system, somebody who's full of creativity and wonderful agency in many ways. And that is really, really one of the issues that I like, or one of the qualities of this book, is to unpack this notion of the fixer, smuggler person, and really see that person as a character that emerges at a very particular time as a result of some political and social constraints that makes it necessary for this person to arise and mediate those circumstances. So it's a form of, Vigh would say, globalization from below, maybe. Somebody who understands to connect otherwise disconnected worlds. So that was my second point. The third, duplicity. I think, again, you choose a very, very interesting theme here that is not just a West African theme, but a theme that we can all relate to in this day of age. And the question of what is real and what is fake, and what is fake real, what is real fake. I mean, it goes through the book and it goes through our lives at this very political moment in time. And for other reasons, other purposes, I'm rereading Baudrillard at the moment, and the postmodernists, and the concept of hyperreality. And of course, this concept of hyperreality, very briefly, is about simulation, substituting reality of the map, substituting the territory, and the old reality rotting away. So we live in a culture of hyper-reality, that is where the signifier and the signified has collapsed. And when he wrote that 40 years ago. It was kind of hyperbole, a little bit of science fiction. But today, maybe not so much, given that I don't want to offend anybody's political sensibilities. But in this country, a former reality television star has become the president. So that we all live now in a reality show as extras. And so, but the critique of that was always that this was a very Western thing. Susan Sontag's famous critique of this was that it's fine with all this mediated lives. If it's in Paris or New York or elsewhere, we can understand it. But what about the global South, where people live in old school realities and they're weighed down by too much reality? But here we really see, a kind of local form of hyper-reality emerging from below, a low-tech hyper-reality where simulation really becomes, a really interesting feature of life. You show it so beautifully when you talk about these new forms of kinship, where people marry out of convenience or marry out of convenience and then become, this couple. It's beautiful, and I have to rethink my whole, critique of Baudrillard to kind of maybe there is, a different, strand of hyper-reality that just, is played out in very different ways in the global South. So I will end there, but thank you again, Charlie. It's a beautiful book, and congratulations.
Okay. I would like to thank Ranji and the FHI. I think FHI is like an oasis. You peregrinate through the desert, then you find this beautiful place which is terribly hospitable. And in any case, that has been my experience for a long time. Every time I come here and I spend time here, I always leave with the feeling of being more intelligent than when I first came. So I very much appreciate this tradition. Charlie has been and is still a human being before even being an academic, who is very dear to a lot of us. I think Ranji said it, and I'm very happy to be here, Charlie, for the celebration of this book. I have heard about this book or elements of it for so long, and I was very happy to see it out, especially in our collection, in our series at Duke University Press, Theory in Forms. I take it as a priceless gift to all of us who have seen you working on it. A gift of the kind only you knows how to design and I would say curate. I take the book to be a pivotal contribution to our attempt to say something meaningful about contemporary life forms and life worlds beyond the immediate object of the study. This is, let's say, the broad meaning I think the book has. So a meaningful contribution to what we have to say about contemporary life forms and life worlds, which I understand to be the task not only of ethnography, but of ethnography as critique. So it seems to me your book goes a little beyond, let's say, classical ethnography. It's a happy marriage of ethnography and critique, ethnography as critique. And this was already present in your earlier work. What we have now is that you have pushed it to its maximum intensity, and that's why the book will become a classic, not only in African studies, but in well beyond African studies. But since part of the book is located in Africa, let me just say one or two words about how it fits within this field, which is extremely rich, has been there for a long time, sometimes invisible, but has contributed tremendously to the production of knowledge about our world, at least since the 19th century. Let me say that for those of us working on Africa, this task of producing ethnography as critique has been at times perplexing and at times exhilarating. I find in your book that kind of exhilaration, which it is sometimes difficult to perceive in other works. Why is it both exhilarating and perplexing? It's because, as a name and as a sign, Africa has always occupied a paradoxical position in modern formations of knowledge. Paradoxical in the sense that, on one hand, the region has provided most of our modern disciplines with some of their foundational categories. What would psychoanalysis be, for instance, without the concept of the fetish? I can go on and on with other concepts that have come from Africa and have irrigated various disciplines outside of area studies per se. From anthropology to political economy, from post-structuralism to psychoanalysis and post-colonial theory, the continent has been the purveyor of some of the most compelling concepts, without which modern criticism would be utterly poor. And I see your book as contributing precisely to the making of new concepts for the project of critique in the 21st century, for what is coming. Not what has happened already, but for what is coming, along the lines of arguments made by Jean and John Komarov, for instance, in their theory from the South, that to a large extent, what we are witnessing, in fact, is a planetary turn of the African predicament. And this book is a marvelous instantiation of that planetary turn of the African predicament, which itself is based on the belief that the fate of our planet might be played out in the global South at the end of it, and maybe in the African continent. And that the task of critique is not only to make that announcement, but to embrace it as the starting point of new forms of writing, new forms of meaning-making about life forms and life worlds as they emerge in this part of our world. Let me end it, because Ranji was very insistent on the fact that we shouldn't go beyond our time. I would just like to add two very small things. I think, as you know yourself, the study of Africa has long been dominated, I would say, by two modes of argumentation. The first one, I call it normativism. Normativism is what? You take things here and there, you put a few anecdotes, you add up a few statistical indices. All of this in order to achieve what? In order to measure the gap between what Africa is and what we are told it ought to be. This way of reading, of course, always ends up constructing Africa as a pathological case, as a figure of lack. It tells us what Africa is not and hardly ever tells us what it actually is. That's what I call normativism, and we find it everywhere. That is one tradition. Your books do not fall into that category. They did you think they did? No, they don't. I mean, they don't. They fall into another category, which then you really take it to its what I call maximum intensity. What is that tradition you write yourself in? It's a mode of argumentation rooted in a tradition of detailed, vivid, and richly textured ethnography and historiography, deeply embedded within this tradition is what is known as thick ethnography, but also interpretive history and symbolic analysis, all of which have become, I would say, powerful examples of how we should think and write about human agency, as well as what analytical strategies we should deploy in order to describe, interpret specific forms of social life in particular settings. And you do it marvelously. You do it very, very well. And I think that were we to take very seriously this book, it would help us to renew the project of critique in general for the first half of the 21st century, to enrich it at least in 4 directions, and I'll stop there. In the direction of, first of all, how we understand the connection between informality and the struggles for livelihood. Because the two, in this case, are symbiotically related. Second, how we understand the question of singularities rather than of individuality or identity, which are so prevalent in political discourse today. Third, what we make of the logics of mobility and multiplicity, that is of unfinished series, rather than a calculus of countable collections. And finally, what we make of the logics of experimentation and compositional processes, something Jane Geyer has also written about. If we were to take these 4 elements seriously, then we would be properly armed to say something new about the world we are entering in, and to, in the process, re-enchant the project of critique. That's why I really believe that your book is marvelous, and I thank you for having written it. Thank you.
So I received the book a month ago, and I was about to go for a holiday with my daughters to Brittany in France, where I live. So I took it with me, and I read it on the train. I read it after dinner. I didn't read it on the beach because the weather was awful, but I had it with me for some days. And I was laughing very often, so my daughters couldn't believe it was an academic book. I would begin with 2 comments, and then I have a few questions. So the first comment is on the presence of Kodjo. I found that very beautifully done. And I'm an anthropologist, and we learned that we shouldn't rely on one best informant, un informateur privilégié. So that is old school anthropology, the time where you would take someone and use it as a representative of his culture, ethnic group, or whatever. So we don't do that anymore. But still, sometimes in some fieldwork sites, we do work with one or two or a couple of important persons, and we're not always able to write with them or to put them in the front. And I found that that was a very important achievement. So it reminded me. It reminded me of another very good book I read in recent years, which is Harry Anglo, the Go-Go Breeze, Zambia's Radio Outdoor and the Voices of Free Speech, which again, in the title there is the name of one person which has been prominent in this fieldwork. And then I think this kind of book, this kind of figure really stays with you. And I really want to say how well done it is. It's not a biography, and we not only see Kodjo's perspective, but also you go beyond. We have the perspective from the embassy, but still, Kodjo is our main guide throughout, and I think it works beautifully. Maybe I would have, because you anticipate a lot of the questions we have in the book about, ethical issues, political issues, but maybe on the choice of co-authorship or co-signature, I think you could tell us a bit more. My second point is on the issue of fake, and Hans has elaborated very beautifully on that, but so my take is a bit different. I think what I liked a lot in the book was that there is a vast array of situations, and on the issue of fake, we go from situation where there is a performance, so the issue of performing with a distance, people play a role. And then there are those situations where the distinction between real and fake is blurred. And I think that is this wide array of situations is very important to keep in mind. Because we're not only on the side of performance, playful, forgery, but also in situations where people are obliged to produce fake documents, but then these fake documents have an impact in their lives. Someone will add a spouse to his dossier, but then his real wife finds about it and is at lost. So I think this is a strength of the book, and maybe theoretically something where you can push things further. So now I have few questions. The first one is on the geography. Togolese engage very eagerly in DV lottery in fantastic numbers. And the question is, why Togo? And you say something about that. It's a very poor country, plus there is the political, few political perspective. But then I looked at the figures for the African continent, and I couldn't read any pattern, because it's not a matter of Anglophone versus Francophone. The Henrik's Guinea-Bissau is a place of objection, but people don't, run to the DV lottery. So I was wondering if you could say a bit more about that. I work in Mali, where the figures are very low, but desire to go elsewhere is also always there. My second question is about the council interview and council, the situations of the interviews, because yesterday you summed it up saying that the council, there is the issue of the documents, the database. We didn't speak about technologies, but this issue is very important, and the council subjectivities. And I would introduce the consular work culture I mean, I missed a bit about who are they, and especially as a francophone, you know, for us, the consul is the consul général, and then you have agent consulaire. So I was a bit lost because I have my English, who are these consuls? But I think on this topic, you know, how are they trained, and what kind of work practices is behind, that would add something. I don't know if you know the work by Alexis Spire, who did ethnographic research in France on immigration desks in France, but also in one African embassy. For the sake of confidentiality, he doesn't name it, but yeah, I guess it's somewhere not far where you work. So yeah, that is some point where I think that could give more strength also to the description. And finally, my last point also echoes discussions we had yesterday in vast debates in the field of migration studies, because by focusing on this situation, you highlight the desires to leave, and obviously it's as a monograph you can't speak of everything, but still we are always left with the, you know, do all West African or Africans want to live? And the aspirations to migrate are high, but still, you know, that there might be alternatives. So there is this incredible detail at the end that Kodjo might convert as a farmer if the business doesn't work anymore. I was intrigued by that. And so I thought that even if it was not the purpose of the book, for instance, what about applicants that were turned down? We just see that they are ruined, and sometimes, you know, someone lost money, his wife, and everything in the process. But I was wondering, and after, what do they do, and what are the other possibilities in Togo? So thank you very much for a brilliant book.
Right, it's sometimes difficult to be last. I think what I wanted to say perhaps has been said. I think I'll also address the critical capacity of the book, but in a different way than Achille, I think. But first of all, thank you for giving me the chance to read it. I think it's a wonderful book. It's beautifully written. It's ethnographically rich, and I also think it's theoretically sharp. Furthermore, it's courageous. It's an atypical phenomenon to look at anthropologically, and it's doing so by following one key interlocutor is currently an unusual ethnographic approach as well. Having said that, I think the knowledge produced by this analytical strategy is potent, and I think that's what I want to address. How is it? In which way it's potent? So the visa lottery and Kodjo's navigation of it provides insights that are socio-political and critical. They also provide insights that cut across scale from individual desires, literally sort of embodied individual desires, to global states of economic polarization. Now, in this manner, the visa lottery provides a window, we may say, to global inequalities in a very nuanced and convincing manner. As the book ends by you visiting lottery winners in the US, just as an example, it shows how the grip of these inequalities are so ingrained in the social order that migrants' marginality actually travels with them. So we end up in the book by coming to a realization that these people, they can't outrun it. They can run across continents and they can move quickly and so on. But their marginality as West Africans seem to be stuck onto them somehow. So winning the visa lottery does not entail escaping poverty, but moving into the lowest echelons of US society instead. Into a position, you say, where they once again struggle to make ends meet and have any kind of viable lives and worthy being. So winning the visa lottery may in this respect afford migration, but I think you very clearly show that it doesn't necessarily afford social mobility. And in an increasingly polarized world, the visa lottery becomes a metaphor for social mobility as a game of chance where the odds are rigged against you, but where the fantasy of winning propels you to continuously invest. And so this, I mean, we can, in anthropology, it's not popular right nowadays to talk about suffering as such, but I think if we say it as it is, it doesn't end on the most positive note, but rather on a critical one, which is something needs to be changed and something needs to be done in terms of this. So an investigation of the innocent-sounding visa lottery becomes, in this matter, a forceful critique of the contemporary global order. And I think it's a fantastic contribution to the anthropological literature as such. We need more of that. So to sum up, it's a wonderful, innovative, and exciting read. It moves across scale in a wonderful manner, and this gives it an ethnographically substantiated critical edge, which I greatly enjoyed. So thank you for that.
Tu m'écoutes?
Oui, je t'écoute, Charles. Bonsoir et bonsoir à tout le monde.
Bonsoir. Bonsoir. Donc, Nico, merci beaucoup. Tu es un peu fameux ici. Et tout le monde a voulu te voir. Tout le monde te félicite pour ton travail, ton métier. Hein, c'est extraordinaire. Et ils sont émerveillés par ce qu'on a pu faire ensemble aussi. Donc, tout le monde te félicite.
Merci beaucoup et merci à tout le monde.
Donc, comme on a dit, on veut discuter un peu entre nous, comme si on était à After Beach. Toi avec ton coca, moi avec mon Guinness. Et donc, comment ça? So, laisse-moi traduire un peu. So, we're just going to have a short conversation. A few questions about his practice and about the current moment of the visa lottery. There's a dramatic change that was announced by the State Department a couple of months ago. Now you have to have a passport before you enlist, which to me, I haven't talked to people in the State Department. I don't know why, but to me, it seems like it's a way to run fixers out of business. And to diminish the numbers of applicants. It will have a dramatic effect on Togolese who can now apply. So I want to ask another question first, and then I'll ask Kodjo how he's thinking about this. It's brand new. The sign-up period is just closed, and he was just confronted with this recently before the sign-up period. So it's still a work in progress. I'll be in Lomé in a couple of weeks, and I'll learn a lot more about it there. So, bon, Nico, donc... dis-moi, pourquoi tu veux toujours... non, je vais poser une autre question. C'est que dans ce livre, on a exposé des secrets du travail, de ton métier, n'est-ce pas? Et on a discuté ça plusieurs fois. Ça me donne un peu du peur. Je ne veux pas t'exposer, je ne veux pas qu'on lit ça et on dit on doit éliminer la loterie, mais on a discuté plusieurs fois. Et moi, j'ai posé cette question à nos amis ici. Achille, il est où? Oui, à lui, à Francis Nyamjo, à plusieurs. Et tout le monde a dit non, il faut publier. C'est important de te connaître, de connaître la situation dans la rue, à l'ambassade aussi. Et enfin, toi, tu as dit, il faut publier aussi. Donc, qu'est-ce que tu penses maintenant? Toujours publier ou...
Oui. C'est d'ailleurs déjà publié, mais bon, moi, je suis toujours pour le fait que cela soit publié. Parce que, comme les autres, c'est bon que tout le monde sache ce qui se passe. Et surtout que maintenant, tout ce qui est dit dans le livre ne se fait plus. Donc, on n'a plus vraiment peur parce qu'ils ne pourront plus rien avoir à travers tout ce que le livre dit. Nous, on ne doit plus avoir peur parce que tout cela ne se fait plus. Et tout ce qui est révélé maintenant, on a passé à d'autres étapes. Et au fur et à mesure que la loterie évolue, les procédures aussi changent et les astuces aussi changent avec.
Okay, je vais traduire, merci. So he says the book's already out, so we don't have that choice anymore. But it exposes, I mean, he has always said he feels that it exposes the embassy especially to the tricks that they're up to. And that's, early on, that was the main reason he wanted this book to be written, and he wanted to collaborate in it. But also, and this is sort of fascinating, it's always been fascinating to me, he has said that what's described in the book is ancient history. So the tricks of the trade that he's on to now are new, and he follows the evolution of the visa lottery. So it is constantly changing. I just mentioned a change. Now it's passports. And he's moving on to that. He's not arranging marriages as he was before. He's actually financing individuals and he pays their way, he pays for the embassy interview, he pays their way to the States. And he's figured out ways to recuperate that money once they arrive here. Earlier, he was always worried that they would cross the ocean and he'd never get his money back. But he's figured out ways to do that. So he says, yeah, I mean, it's ancient history, what's described in this book, and it can't really help them. Bon, la deuxième question, c'est maintenant, ils ont introduit tout récemment un nouveau conditionnalité. C'est on doit avoir un passeport avant d'appliquer, n'est-ce pas?
Oui.
Et donc, on ne sait pas pourquoi ils ont fait cela, les consuls. Tu as eu les échos ou quoi?
Oui, bon, je me suis un peu renseigné. Bon, quand tu seras là prochainement, on va encore en parler. Mais ce que j'ai pu avoir comme information, ils disent qu'il y a beaucoup de problèmes en Afrique centrale concernant les passeports. Il semblerait qu'il y a des gens qui jouent et quand ils jouent avec beaucoup de noms, et c'est quand ça gagne après qu'ils font les passeports et avant d'aller à l'interview avec. Donc c'est selon ce que j'ai pu apprendre pour l'instant. C'est principalement les problèmes de l'Afrique centrale qu'il faut qu'on exige que la personne ait un passeport avant de pouvoir jouer. Et maintenant, il ne pourra plus changer ça après d'avoir gagné.
OK.
Mais concernant, comme je t'avais toujours dit, on a déjà même des petits problèmes ici. Quand quelqu'un gagne, il fait la procédure, et quand le jour de l'interview est fixé, il arrive, il dit qu'il n'a pas de passeport, il demande au consul de reporter la date d'interview. Bon, alors que maintenant, avant même d'être programmé depuis Kentucky, on est sûr que tu as ton passeport. Et Kentucky demande d'envoyer le passeport, d'envoyer le casier judiciaire et d'envoyer la naissance avant d'être programmé. Donc, ce qui fait qu'on ne peut pas arriver au consulat pour dire encore qu'on n'est pas encore prêt, de donner encore un peu de temps pour être reprogrammé. Ça, déjà, c'est déjà très bon pour pouvoir donner moins de travail au consulat.
OK, très bien. Attends un peu. So that was actually a fascinating response. So he said that he's heard that in Central African Republic, where they also play, that there's always been a problem in producing documents and getting the passport to line up with the birth certificate, the carte d'identité, and so on, in part because of the proliferation of names that West and Central Africans have. And, until recently, people didn't have family names. So Batema is his family name, but that's an imposition of sort of the documentary archive, the identity documents, and so on. But you often find that the names that people have on the birth certificate are different from the ones on the identity card, or the spelling's different. There are different orthographies that are used, and so on. So there's this sort of riot of names. It's not people's attempts to falsify anything. It's just that they're confused by the impositions of our naming system. So he thinks that's maybe one reason. And secondly, when people are selected and then have to go for the embassy interview, which can actually take quite a bit of time, it's up to 2 years before they go for the interview, often they can't get the money together to get the passport on time, and interviews are put off, and so on. And he thinks it's the State Department's attempt to just sort that all out ahead of time so they aren't wasting so much time canceling interviews. So take note here. I mean, my reading was a cynical reading that they're trying to run people like him out of business. And his is actually a defense of, consular logic and so on. We can talk about that later on. He never disagrees with the rules of the system. He says the rules are created. What I do is I figure out a way around the rules. So it's a different form of sort of resistance, if you will. Bon, et puis, qu'est-ce que tu es en train de faire avec ce... Quoi?
Oui, je voulais ajouter que le problème maintenant, comme ils ont instauré d'avoir le passeport avant de jouer, cela a beaucoup de conséquences sur le jeu maintenant.
Oui.
S'il n'y aura pas beaucoup qui vont pouvoir jouer, beaucoup n'ont pas la possibilité de se faire un passeport avant de pouvoir jouer. Et ce qui va faire, à mon avis, beaucoup ne pourront plus jouer comme d'habitude à la loterie comme cela se fait habituellement, quoi. Et ça, ce n'est pas vraiment bien. Parce que déjà, il y aura une grande partie de la population partout qui ne pourra pas participer à ce jeu-là.
Et donc, qu'est-ce que tu vas faire comme traiteur?
Oui. Moi,
Oui,
moi, comme je t'ai dit, maintenant, je serai obligé de pouvoir aider les gens le plus possible à faire des sports. Les gens qui ont déjà le bac et qui ont la volonté de participer au jeu, je vais essayer de financer à ces gens-là pour qu'ils puissent avoir le passeport et attendre le mois d'octobre prochain. Et même parfois, je suis en train de réfléchir comment est-ce que je cherche des gens qui seront devant le service de passeport et pouvoir enregistrer
très bien.
les gens qui ont les passeports qui vont jouer.
Très bien. OK, je vais traduire. So, the new rule that you have to have a passport before applying obviously dramatically affects his business and the chances of Togolese. And so it's, he's still in formation. And but he's, for now, he has a couple of new strategies. One is to hang out at the passport office. So when people come out of the passport office already with passports, he then signs them up. A second one is that he told me the other day that he was going to fund certain people who have the baccalaureate. There are these conditions. You have to have the high school diploma is one of them, and the bac. And people who are at university. And he will actually finance them to get a passport. And he doesn't know how many he can do a year. I mean, he's doing well in the business, so he has some reserves. But he said the other day 5 to 10 a year, and hopefully it will grow. And then, but since he's purchasing the passport, he owns the passport, and he will keep it at his office and play for them. And he said he would keep it for up to 5 years. And so if they don't get selected this year, he'll play for them again next year. He also pointed out, not now, but the other day, that of course it reduces the number of applicants dramatically from Togo. So if there are hundreds of thousands, if there have been hundreds of thousands a year, now there may be, 20,000 or even less. And so it reduces the overall pool, and he feels that if he can keep playing, last year he applied for 2,000. Next year he may only be able to apply for 300, but that he may actually have more winners in those 300 because the overall pool is reduced. So you can see, he's in the process of rethinking all of this. Bon, Nico, la dernière question, c'est tu as joué combien de fois? Ça dépasse 20 ans, n'est-ce pas? Et tu n'as jamais gagné. Mais tu continues à jouer et tu veux que ta femme passe aux États-Unis, tes enfants aussi. Mais pourquoi? Tu as réussi dans ta vie à Lomé, et tu veux toujours quitter ou quoi?
Non, moi, c'est quand j'étais encore jeune que je voulais ça. Maintenant, aujourd'hui, je ne veux plus. J'aime un champ, comme tu sais, j'aime beaucoup aller au champ. Et je préfère rester au champ que de venir maintenant aux États-Unis. Mais bon, je pense que si jamais il arrive, peut-être pour ma femme et mes enfants. Mais moi, bon, si je viens aux États-Unis, c'est peut-être pour venir visiter Charles et les autres États-Unis.
Donc, si tu gagnes, tu vas venir pour faire un peu de tourisme et puis tu rentres ou quoi? Okay. So I asked him, so he's been playing for over 20 years without ever being selected. He keeps playing. And I said, if you win, you're doing well in Lomé, would you come? And he said, no, not really anymore. He'll keep playing. He said that was my youth. That was something during my youth. But I want to send my wife and my children to have a better life for them than I can provide for them in Lomé. And I will visit. I want to be a tourist and see what this land of dreams is like. So anyway. Bon, d'accord. Je crois que on n'a plus du temps. Donc, tout le monde te remercie. Et on va se voir bientôt. Je serai à Lomé la semaine prochaine.
OK. Merci beaucoup à tout le public là-bas.
OK. Merci, Nico. OK. So I'm just going to make a few comments, and then we can throw it open to questions. My deepest, most profound thanks to all of the commentators. I'm honored. I'm flattered. I'm incredibly appreciative, and indeed, it was my dream team of folks. And to have Ian back was really great. So thank you so much for those comments. And I was actually hoping for more critical comments. So. To give me stuff to respond to. I want to just make a few statements about what I see the book doing, the work that I see the book doing, and then we can throw it open to others. Yes, it's of course about the street, the Togolese street, the West African street, and about a brilliant visa broker. Kodjo is one of the smartest people I've ever been around, and he has a lawyer's mind, and he loves to work his way through the details of these cases. And someone who's been incredibly generous with me and open to telling his stories. So it's, for me, a lot of the chase has been about that. It's been every time I sit down with him at a little bar around the corner from his bureau, his hole in the wall, always with his Coke and me with a Guinness beer, he begins to tell these stories that they always change. They're always extraordinary. He's always thinking his way through the next iteration. And that's been sort of pure pleasure for me. And an entirely different project from any I've ever done before. I've always liked my time in the villages in the north, and I've written a lot about that. But this took me in directions that I never imagined, and opened up new possibilities for ethnography. Thanks, Hans, for your comments about that, and the others as well. For ethnography, for how to write ethnography, for do I focus on a single person, or do I interview? I interviewed many fixers, but do I bring them into the text or not? All those are hard decisions. A lot of this, putting this book together was a real challenge to me. It took me away from the conventions that I was familiar with. So all of that was tough but pleasurable. So the sort of the attempt to understand the street and street savvy in the face of what I call consular reason was a big part of what drove my interest in this project. But it's also, and I think especially, an attempt to push back at several images or representations of the migrant and the migratory phenomenon. The one is the pervasive perception in the State Department, in the public, in the embassies in Lomé, to see the West African as a fraudster, as someone who commits fraud, who can't help it, and who therefore can never be trusted. And the assumption of most consuls and I've known several generations of them, at the embassies, is that everyone coming before them is a fraudster or a potential fraudster. So I try in this book to not run from that. I think it would be a mistake to not engage that. But I try to complicate that and humanize Kodjo, the Togolese applicant. And after all, in this case, not in every case, but in most cases, people are engaging in arranged marriages. That's what he calls them, les mariages arrangés. Arranged marriages, many of which, or some of which, let's say, actually become real. I know many couples in the States who met through the visa lottery and traveled together, and they're still together, and they have families today. So that's an interesting aspect of this. But all of them do this for one simple reason, that the embassy interview fees are so high that they can't afford them. Even middle-class Togolese can't afford it. If the State Department dropped the interview fee to what the tourist visa fee is, $150, the marriages would disappear tomorrow. So it's really the system that pushes them to engage in what the consulate considers fraudulent practice, arranging marriages of convenience. The second image is, I thank you again, Hans, for bringing this up, but it's the image of the intermediary, of the fixer, the trafficker. These are dominant images in Western journalism and Western imaginaries about this area of the world, about the trans-Saharan trade, right, about the migration phenomenon generally. It's traffickers and fixers who are pushing people because they benefit off them, they make money off them, and they're to blame for the whole thing. And that's Hans, in his great writing about connection men and pushers, has really undermined this image of the fixer, of the connection man, who is a very complicated figure, and after all is no different from all of the intermediaries that we all rely on every day to get stuff done. We hire lawyers, we hire people to do our taxes, et cetera, et cetera. That's most of what Kodjo does, is he fills out documents for people, and he provides services. So that's a second image that I wanted to push back against. The third, and I think last one, I'll stop after this, is the migrant as precarious and abject. In these cases, of course, in Togo, because you have to have the high school diploma, the baccalaureate, to get a visa, they're a special category of people. In fact, Kofi, I mean, it's probably less than 1% of the Togolese population that has the bac, right? I mean, it's a very small percentage. So they are, in fact, the best of the best. Trump said a few years ago, we got to get rid of this visa lottery because it's bringing the worst of the worst to our country. In the case of the visa lottery, it's the opposite. It's the most highly educated people in these countries, and many of them have university degrees. They work at banks. They're school teachers and so on. But they win the lottery because of the dreams of the global and the U.S. and so on. They leave anyway. So they're not precarious, but in fact, they're not all that unlike other sorts of migrants, and indeed those who cross the desert. It costs money to get to the desert and to pay off the fixers and connection men and to get up into North Africa and do the same and to attempt the crossing. Some people have estimated you have to have $10,000 to travel. So these aren't the poorest of the poor. These are people with often with means already. They often stop along the way and continue working. But I want to bring in a slightly different piece of ethnography that has really helped me think through the precarity of the migrant. And it comes from the villages where I work in northern Togo. I mentioned this yesterday for those of you who were here then, that the young men in the villages where I work, many of them leave every year to go work in Nigeria on farms and for 9 months of the year. They work from early in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning until 6 at night. It's incredibly hard work. These guys are very capable. They're the best cultivators in the entire subregion, so they can do it. And they say, well, we work really hard at home too, so what's the difference? We're young. And they do it because they get a motorcycle at the end of the year, and they come back, and they're the toast of the town and the village. The Duke students I've taken for the past few years have been interested in this migratory phenomenon, and we've done interviews with many of these young men. One time I was talking to a few who had come back with a motorcycle, and I said, just to challenge them, well, what if I had a field here, or the community established a field that you could work in, and we would pay you as much or more as you make in Nigeria, so that you could buy a motorcycle here, and you could be here and help your parents cultivate and so on. Wouldn't that be better? How many of you would stay? Almost all of them said they would still go. And when you ask them why, and Kofi, I'm sure you've heard folks like this, they say, l'aventure. It's the adventure of it. I've spent a lot of time parsing that word. It's a complicated word, complicated term for them. Part of it is to get away from parents who are overbearing and suck off their resources. But a lot of it gives us a chance to visit a new country, to hear a new language, Yoruba, to go through market towns we've never seen, to visit Lagos, and they come back with wild stories. If you're in the village after a group of them has returned, at the drinking sessions every day, there are incredible stories that circulate. And for me, and you hear this term aventure all the way across the Sahel area of West Africa, from Senegal to Chad, of young men who are leaving for Europe, and when they ask them why, they say, c'est l'aventure. It's the adventure. To me, this puts them, rather than distancing the precarious West African migrant from everyone else in the world, it puts them on a par with that. With others. They're also tourists, and they have curiosity, and they like to travel, and they're looking for opportunity, of course. That's why they do it, and that's why those kids go to Nigeria. So that's another image that I wanted to push back on in this book. And just a final short note. To me, this material demonstrates, first and foremost, a deep commitment to life, to even what I would call exuberant life, and to dreams and the power of dreams, and to dreaming in what most people would say is a pretty abject, precarious context of West Africa. but it's not just a celebration of that. There are a lot of sad stories and a lot of tragic tales that that people in the visa lottery system talk about that I've seen. People spending all their money and selling houses to raise the funds for the visa interview at the embassy and losing it all. They're denied and they lose it all, and they're in debt for many years. But especially, and it's the second to last chapter of the book that a couple of you referred to earlier, it was making the rounds of Togolese in the U.S. who come with papers, who get jobs right away. They have a green card the day they step into the country. They get U.S. passports. They all want a blue passport. They call it les bleus, blue passport, as quickly as possible. But they aren't the happiest of campers. In fact, almost all of them who I spoke to said that they would return tomorrow to Togo if they could, if they only had jobs back at home. And so it's a at the end of the day a sad and even tragic and melancholic story about the migrant in today's world. And what they say is, in the States, I make a living. Je gagne, mais je ne vis pas. I make a living, but I don't have a life. They miss the sociality. They miss being in the streets where they hear their language spoken all the time. They miss the food. They, of course, make Togolese food here, but it's not as good as that at home, and so on. And if you keep pressing them, they say, well, we do it for our children. And their children, indeed, are often real success stories here. They grow up speaking English. They learn the school system, cultural literacy, and so on. I know several children of visa lottery winners here at Duke. They do very well in schools. They have West African parents who make sure that they're going to do well in school or else. And so their children, it's a different story. But they themselves, those who left often good livelihoods at home and come here, never really sort of realized their dreams, and that's, to me, a sort of sad ending to this story. Okay, I'll stop there, and maybe we could field some questions. Do we have, what time are we at? 11:47. So 15 minutes or so. Yeah, Miriam.
Thank you very much. This has been a fascinating morning. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the relationship that those who have come here have with the families back in Togo, and to what extent the need that the money coming in on a regular basis, what kinds of controls these families then have on the Togolese who want to come back.
That's a great question, and it's the remittance question. So Togolese who are here, all or most of them, feel obligated to send money home, and money home often every month. And so they're constantly in relation to those back home. They're expected to send money home. If they don't, they're criticized, they're shamed. They might even worry about, a cult attack and so on. Which also further impoverishes them here. You're working at Walmart, you're paying, $700 a month for an apartment, you're buying your food, and so on, and then you're sending $200 a month back. Which can do a lot of work back there for people. $200 goes a long way, but they're pretty impoverished here. And I'm actually, I think my next project is going to be on the idea of return, the imaginaries of return, those who, some people are actually going back now, and following that. But part of it will be about the remittance question, and the stories are wild and interesting, and the figures are extraordinary. I mean, in Africa, up to $1 trillion a year is sent back home by people in the diaspora. Western Union takes 10% of that. So $100 billion goes to Western Union, and there are people who are trying to figure out ways to circumvent that and create money transfers through cell phones that would just cut out the service fees altogether. Yeah.
Just a social mobility. I can't remember
Yeah.
who mentioned it, and that you carry your marginality with you, and that there is no social mobility. But how about the families back in Togo when these remittances allow them to build a house that's bigger than the one they were in? Is there social mobility for the families?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the families back home, are they mobile? My sense, I haven't really done the solid research on this. Kofi, you could probably help us with this, but my sense is that the families are not that upwardly mobile through the remittance money. It's money that is stopgap, that helps them pay school fees for some of the children and medical fees, and or for funerals when people pass and so on. But the people here rise in status back home because they're sending money back, they're supporting families. One friend of mine down the road said that he can actually call the shots in local elections because he sends money back every year to pay school fees. He pays school fees for 12 nephews and nieces to go to the university. And he's a big man back home. And so they have a certain stand. They're standing here is low, back there I think is a little higher. Kofi, you wanted to ask a question. Kofi's from Lomé, and he knows Kodjo as well.
Yeah, it's more of like some comments, not questions. So I want to, first of all, second what you just said, like families back home don't really get social mobility because most of the money is for consumption, and they pretty much have the same status back home. And as for my comments, I want to take two aspects of your book. The first one is the adaptability, and the second one is the frauds. So I want to extend that to the new rule, the passport rule, because I witnessed firsthand the ways in which not only the Togolese people, but also the Togolese administration adapt to this new rule. So since
and you were just in Lomé, right? So
yeah, I was just in Lomé.
He was there for the sign-up period last month. Yeah.
So since people didn't know that there was a new rule. So when they launched the website, the DV lottery website, and they realized that you need to have a passport. The passport office was flooded by people, like literally 1,000 people every day, every single day. So people have to wake up like at midnight to be there. And then you will be like, 100 or something in the list. So I also wake up to go and see what's going on. And I realized that the administration also adapt to it. So they start working at 4 a.m. All the way to 6 p.m. just to adapt to this number of people applying for their passports. And when I talk to people there who are on the queue, I realized that many of them actually want the passport not only for the lottery visa, but they are ready to pay an extra money to get the passport faster. So I'm like, okay, do you realize it's just for a lottery? You are waking up early in the morning, paying a lot of money for just a lottery, but it's still worth it because they believe that going abroad not only will give a chance of social mobility, but also has a prestige that goes with it. So if you are back home, even though your situation will not change, you still have the prestige of saying that my son is in the US, or my sister, or my brother is in the US. So that all of that plays into it. So the population and the administration really adapt to it. And now coming down to the fraud part of the system, the Togolese institutions are usually seen as like fraudulent institutions by the council, just like Charlie said. But in the passport case, I realized that people at the passport office are not taking bribes. They refuse to take bribes at that moment At that particular moment in time, they refuse to take bribes. And when I ask why, they say, c'est trop chaud. It's too busy. You take bribes, you might have a lot of problems. So they refuse to take bribes. You have to follow the normal step. The passport is out usually in 2 weeks, but they try to cut that down, like 2 or 3 days down, in order for people to get their passport faster. And it really challenged the embassy's idea of a fraudulent institution. So new rules are not only impacting the ways in which the US wants to play the lottery visa, but it's also impacting our institutions. And this is a very interesting moment, at least in the lottery visa, and I'm looking forward to see how it evolves.
Great, thanks, Kofi. Yeah, I've asked people which documents can you manufacture, and they say any document, as an original document, except for the passport and the back. Apparently, the baccalaureate is hard to manufacture. Yeah, Lee.
Thanks, Charlie. It's good to see Nicola again. I had the pleasure of being in the little hole and meeting him and chatting him up. What was amazing to me is the amount of risk everyone is willingly to take on. Sort of risk that can be mitigated a little bit, but a lot of it's sort of luck too, that they're just sort of managing and hoping. And then usually people will take on risk for the reward, but then the reward when they come here it's not equivalent to risk. So in one way, I love this because, the economists will talk about, cost benefit analysis and rational choice. And we always roll our eyes, people don't really think like that. On the other hand, is it just the adventure? I mean, it almost seems like there's so much risk, so much luck. There's just a thin margin. Well, I guess people buy lottery tickets too, but they're spending all this money. What else is there something else sort of culturally going on? Is it the adventure? It just doesn't seem like such a, not rational choice, but like a good bet even.
Yeah, I think maybe we got to bring Kofi back in. I mean, there is a collective fantasy in Lomé, in Accra, in Lagos, that everyone, you have to travel. If you're young, you have to travel. There's nothing here for us. The political regime is repressive. In order to achieve your personhood, you've got to travel because, there's money out there that you can't find here. I mean, there are so many young men in Lomé I know who can't get married because they can't afford the marriage gifts and beyond to pay for a house, et cetera, et cetera. They can't find jobs. I mean, what Lomé is 90% informal economy, small, right, Kofi? People, they feed themselves. I mean, there's no homelessness, in a place, or very little in a place like Lomé. People feed themselves, but they can't get ahead, and they can't realize their social projects, and they imagine that they can if they come here. And they probably can. I mean, if you get a visa through the visa lottery, you're gonna be making U.S. Money. And if you save it, you can go back home and marry someone and bring them over, and so on and so on, if you don't end up with your visa lottery spouse. But there's a big collective fantasy about aller à l'étranger, the going abroad. It's extraordinary, and I don't think it's true in Central Africa and maybe in Central Africa, but in East Africa and Southern Africa, it's a very sort of West African phenomenon. Bumi.
I think part of it too is the remittance. People who left, send home money, and then so people at home look at them and think, yeah, there's money in this place. And then, Charlie, could you say more about the performance of success?
About who?
The performance of success. People who are here, who are really not, they are, not very well paid, but then when they go back, because I experience that at home, I see it at home too. And I see it
In
in Nigeria that,
women's from
yes,
Nigeria, yeah.
yes, that the lower you are actually here socioeconomically, the more you perform. And the professional class, doesn't do that. They don't go home to perform. So it's a very strange phenomenon. Could you say more about that?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the puzzles for me for a long time was if people are not terribly happy here, why aren't they telling people back home, don't come, and so on. And everyone says you absolutely can't, that no one will believe you. They see the money coming back. What are you trying to hide from us? And they just won't believe you. And so it remains a secret. I've asked so many people, have you told anyone back home what it's like? No, I can't. They won't believe me. And it will create big trouble for me back home. So what they do is they go, they're working at Walmart. They save their money for 5 years. They go back for a month. What do? They rent a big car. They, if they can't stay with family there because family's up country, they might rent a nice apartment. They take all of their friends out every night on the town, and they perform success. And, I thought, wow, wouldn't that money be better spent some other way, save it, and so on and so on. But it is, it's their day in the sun. And when I've seen them back in Lomé, they are the happiest people you've ever seen. And on the day they leave, and you can understand 5 years, for a month, but it's a month well spent for them. But it's striking that you can't announce your travails back home. Yes.
So I'm Jackson. I'm from Ghana, and I can really relate to most of the things that we've been hearing this morning. And I'm kind of wondering whether in your work, the role, whether you came across the role of prophets. The religious aspect of it, because why will someone knowing that the odds to really win the lottery, it's almost diminishing year on year because of the sheer number of applicants. Why will people be so optimistic enough to invest? And I think for the most part, religion plays a role in there because in my country, in Ghana, you have a proliferation of prophets who can project into the spiritual realm and actually prophesy to people that, hey, you have a place here in the United States or abroad, and people are willing to go ahead, buy into that and invest. In fact, when I was coming over to Duke at an interview outside the American embassy, there were prophets who had set up camp, praying for those going in there so that they will have favor in the eyes of the... So I don't know whether you took into consideration the religious impulse that drives this.
Thank you for that. No, that's... I talk about religion at a few points in the book. The churches in Lomé, I'm sure in Accra as well, before the lottery selection in May, pastors will lead prayers for success in the lottery system. We're all going to America, and we're all going to have visas and so on. Individuals, of course, do the same. I mean, there was a guy from Ghana who apparently had many girlfriends. He was married but also had many girlfriends. He got selected in the visa lottery. Before he went for the embassy interview, he began going to church every night. He would come home early, and he was and reconnected with his family and left all his girlfriends behind. And as a nice ending to the story, he got the visa. His family got the visa. But individuals are praying for it. Those who aren't Christians may go back to the village and consult with diviners, and so on and so on. One of the interesting things, I never really got fully to the bottom of it, but I talk about it a couple places in the book, is the notion of randomness. Lottery luck is not culturally resonant there in the way that it is here. So people say, well, it's a lottery, but I can actually affect my own chances in the lottery. I can determine whether I'm going to win the lottery or not. Right, and these are worlds in which randomness, even the rain coming or not, is something you can control through prayer or through divination and so on. So it's there's an interesting sort of type of articulation there. Yeah, Nancy, you've had your hand up for a while.
This is just a footnote. Don't you think that the element of randomness itself can be a cause of hope when you're up against an overdetermined bureaucracy and that kind of thing? It seems to me that that's part of what the fixer, or as a trickster, exploits the little pockets of randomness. It's kind of Maxwell's demon, if you will, that's not going to let things get sorted out as it will.
Yeah.
To me, that component of being able to embrace random, to explore it, find joy in it, was to me what you needed from this guy.
Yeah.
That it was the element of hopefulness in an overdetermined materialist world. And I'm speaking as someone who works on fiction, but it seems to me that that's so true.
Yeah.
Fiction, that's what I.
That's nice, Nancy. Yeah.
Your text and novel.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Because it can find that element.
I think you're probably right about that. I never thought of that before in quite that way. And one of the extraordinary things is that when people don't get selected, they assume they're going to be picked next year. They have hope, and I don't know if the randomness plays into that, but it may.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It could work for them as well as for anyone else.
Yeah.
Where else do you find such a system?
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess the question that I want to ask is how the fixer is perceived within the community. If the fixer is seen as someone doing something illegal, or is the legality sort of smoothed over, and it's not really like he's not an illegal person or not doing illegal activity?
But in Nicolas' case, he has a really strong record, and so people love him for that. The thought that he would be marrying people just to get them to the States doesn't bother people in the least. Everyone, he has a couple of ministers who were clients of his, and he sent children of theirs to the States, and it's what you do when you live in a post-colony and you're trying to circulate. That's the way to do it. And so I've never heard it, I write about his getting into trouble when he went to Burkina Faso. But at home, he has no worries at all. The embassy actually has put him in jail a couple of times. One time the head police officer was a high school classmate of his, and he got out, right away, and he said, "Tell me about your business," and Nicolas described it to him, and he said, "Boy, that's a really good business." The officer in Burkina Faso who was he was in jail for 3 months in Burkina, thanks to the U.S. Embassy, that didn't show up on the day of his hearing. But I had been in Ouaga with him, and then I had to go back to attend to a student, and then he disappeared, and we didn't know where he was. And finally, we found out he was at a place called the Police Judiciaire. It's while they're doing the investigation, they keep you there. It's like a holding facility. And I went there, and I talked to the police officer. And one day, the second day I was there, he called Nicolas in to meet, to see me. And I think the police officer wanted to sort of gauge our relationship, how well do these guys know each other and so on. Halfway through it, the police officer said, this is a really interesting business. Would you, Kodjo, go into the business with me when you get out? He said, I've got a digital camera and, a laptop, but I need a little coaching. And apparently he approached him another time after I left about the same thing. So anyway, so I think we need to end there. Thank you so much.